Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're just gonna wait a minute as we're getting geared up here for people to get into the room. So we just opened up the room. Welcome, everybody. If you want to pop into the chat and say hello, I'm going to actually change my little bubble at the bottom so that it changes from host and panelist to everyone. Let us know where you are today. Are you working in your office? Are you remote? Where are you in the country? We're here in Philadelphia on a surprisingly lovely day. Um, it's actually Megan's birthday this week, so we just got back from a lovely birthday lunch. So I hope you guys are all having great days.
Thank you,
Dallas,
Christy.
remote in Dallas, Texas. I actually am going to be. I just found out I'm going to be speaking at a conference in Galveston on Galveston Island, and I've never been there. I'm so excited. Um, so, all right, where's everybody else? In September 14th. So hopefully, so that's not hurricane season in Galveston Island, right? No, it'll be totally fine. Susan, I love it at the office always. Yeah, I'll be fine. Okay, good. All right. All right, yay, Marianne in Philadelphia. All right, so fantastic. So people are still popping on here today. Please keep popping in and let us know where you are calling in. Oh, Nevada, so cool. So Megan and I are here at our office today. We're actually in
Mhm.
separate rooms right across from each other. And we're so excited to have this conversation. So everybody that's here, who were any of you guys here last month for the style guide discussion? Like who's a returning? Oh, Corpus Christi, that's right down near Galveston where I'm going to be. I know my Texas
Geography.
geography. Um, and everybody that I know from Texas is like, no problem, that's close. It's only 6 hours, whatever. Um,
Oh, Christy's returning. Excellent.
all right. So for those of you that weren't here, last month, Megan and I did a whole session on breaking down style guides, what they're there for, what they're good for, and the kind of components that we put into it and how they can help you guide your brand. So Megan, is that actually up and out on YouTube for people to find it?
Yes, it's on YouTube and it's also on our website. If you go to iriscreative.com and then go into the resources section and go to webinars, it's right there on the page. So you can access
Awesome.
it there. And it's got some great info.
All right, fantastic. So we're going to be bringing in a couple of pages from different style guides so that you can see and get some context. But if you come today and you're like, that was really helpful, but I feel like I'm missing a piece, go back and watch that one because it's a really good primer on how you make decisions and document those decisions and how the style guide can be used as a learning tool for people. So, what we wanted to do today is actually talk about this aspect of rebranding that's kind of like we often feel like it's invisible, and we've started to call it graphic style. Some people call it visual language. I would love to know, like, what do you guys call like the look and feel of your design work? What I'm very curious, like what's your terminology? Because sometimes we'll get like an RFP or a quote for branding, and we have to put together like, okay, this, what do they mean by what they're saying? So that's always interesting to me. But what me mean by it is, okay, so you got a new logo. Then what? Like, how are you going to redesign your work? What are you going to use? So today we're going to talk about three different organizations that we worked at different periods of time over the last couple of years. They all use remarkably similar color palettes. They all have like blues and yellows, a little, some of them have a little bit of a green or an aqua, and they all have sort of like an orange or a reddish orange. So they're really really similar um, color palettes, but because of the different graphic devices, graphic elements, graphic styles that they use, they all look remarkably different. Some of it's because of photography, but some of it's just because of the styling and the choices and the typography. And we wanted to do this because of two reasons. One, because it's really easy to like, hire somebody to do a rebrand and get a new logo and be like, cool, we've rebranded and feel like you have what you need. I mean, has anybody ever been through that where you've gotten a new logo and then went to go start doing something with it and realized you just didn't know what to do next or didn't have the resources you need to figure out how do I make my design look just because we have new colors and a new logo, it didn't feel like enough. Sometimes that happens.
Mhm.
And so we're going to talk about like three different situations, but and the reasons that they went to different things. And so Megan has a whole bunch of PDFs up to show you. Please jump in and ask questions as we go. And the thing I always like to say is we're going to show you the decisions that we made. We're even going to show you some like behind the scenes stuff that like nobody ever gets to see, that's never up on our website. We're going to show you a little bit of like the crazy designs we showed before the one got finalized, because I think it'll be really helpful for you to kind of see how did we, not just this is where we got to, but like how did we get to where we got to, because it
And
can help you sort of think through the decision making.
I'm going to jump in really quick. We didn't hit record. Oh, you did hit record.
I
Never
did, yeah,
mind.
I hit record.
Okay.
So yeah, she knows that that's definitely one of my challenges. So with that, Megan, I'm going to jump it over into your hands,
All
and
right,
feel free
fabulous.
to like comment, ask questions, and even contradict us if you have different ideas. Don't be nice about our stuff that was our crazy ideas before we jumped in, but they didn't get picked for a reason, so it's okay.
Yes, yes, definitely. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so we are starting with a client that we actually worked with on retainer for several years doing, so they were a team that did not have a graphic designer on staff, didn't have anyone that could work in the graphic design space on staff. And so they hired us to come in and create a bunch of assets for them. So these are their logos, just to give you a sense of what their brand looked like. And this was the brand that we had to work with the whole time. So they had the company was called Delaware Hospice, and they had all of these different programs. Some had a similar name, similar logo. Some of the programs had a completely different look. Specifically, their children's programs had a different look. Um, but what we want to show you is we started with this very kind of limited brand look, and then we expanded it beyond that. So these were the colors. We did not change the colors. The only change that we made when we came in was this accent yellow color that they have was extremely pale. And so when it was paired with any of the that was the only, that color was actually the only color they really paired with any of the other program colors. The other accent color was only used on the children's programs, which were New Hope and Katie Bug. So there were some very specific rules that aren't outlined here. But that pale yellow, when paired with any of the other colors, made everything look washed out and really dull. And so we brightened it up to kind of brighten up the rest of their materials. The first project that we worked on for them was an overhaul of their website. And so some choices that we made when we redid their website were we wanted to, hospice is a sensitive subject, it's a sad subject. And so as we were thinking about imagery for their website, we were trying to think of something that would relate in a nice way, and we came up with the idea of nature. So on a lot of the hot pages specifically about hospice, we show images of leaves in fall because they're still beautiful, but they're dying. The grief resources, all of their grief resources, they already were using sunflowers. So we used some things that they were already working with, and we really leaned into that idea and then expanded that throughout not only their website, but then into all of their materials. And this was a good way to kind of create a new look for them that just felt a little more vibrant, while still being sensitive to the subject that we were dealing with.
And Megan, it also helped us navigate that like it's a hospice subject, and so yes, we want to show people, but sometimes it's tough to get the right pictures, or like you didn't want it to seem too depressing, and so it let us balance the pictures of people with something that felt warm and hopeful.
Yes, and that's a very good point, and that was a really big challenge that we had because they had very strict photography rules about certain things that they wanted to show and didn't want to show. And also they didn't want the people in the photos to look too healthy because
Or too sick.
or too sick. So finding the right stock photography was very challenging. And so that was definitely a way that we kind of worked around that. And so this is an example of one of their brochures where we pulled in that floral photography. This was for their palliative program. And so what we did when we were working on the different program brochures is each program had its own color from that color palette I showed you a minute ago. And we tried to find photography that pulled in colors that were very close to the color, the program colors. So this floral picture has the yellow, it has some greenish tints to it. Um, and so that was why we made some of the choices that we made. Now, another program that they have is a children's palliative care program. And that program, again, we still are using the the nature photography, but that program's called Bug. And so it's the colors are a little bit brighter. And we wanted to showcase that connection to nature by pulling in the ladybug imagery. And we were showing kids, we actually leaned into this idea, especially with a lot of the kids stuff of the blowing the dandelion, because it's kind of like the end of the dandelion. And so that was something that we leaned into with a lot of the photography as well. So there were we tried to make a lot of connections from the subject matter to nature throughout a lot of the marketing materials we created. Was there anything else about the brochures that you wanted to touch on, Beth?
Nope, that's good.
Okay. And then again, with that color palette, we pulled that in as we were creating some reports on some data reports to share with people. And so this just kind of shows how we use
Right.
those color palettes a little bit differently. We leaned in very hard with them to the blue and the green because hospice and palliative care were their two biggest programs. And so those colors were the colors that we wanted to connect with their audience the most. And so if you'll notice, those are the colors we use most often. We also use the yellow because sometimes you just need that pop of color.
And I think that's a really good point, Megan, is that like when you're creating your color palettes, because you can see we just showed you some things that are more colorful, have more photography, but everybody has stuff that's boring that still has to get done, right? And so like this is not the most exciting piece to show you, but I think it's important for you to see that like okay, this is great when you're doing a brochure, but how does your brand work when you're putting data and numbers together? Do you have something that can highlight something? Do you have enough color distance between your darks? How do your tints work? Do your tints get really dull? Sometimes a really dark blue, some blues are made with a lot of black in them. So when you tint them back, they get really ugly and muddy. This one's pretty close to that. It's not the brightest blue. So,
Hmm.
but like for them, slightly dull colors in their tints were actually appropriate, but it might not be for you. We're going to show you one at the end that it got really dull and it was terrible.
Hmm. And then we also used those colors this was one of their impact reports. And so, but we used the brand in a completely different way. Now, this was an impact report. So this was getting sent out to their donors. And so we wanted it to be not cheerful, but it could be a little bit, I don't know, more
Unique,
energetic
right? It
and
didn't need to
unique.
like, it was going out to donors that were already in. So, like, I guess the point of it, Megan, is that you've got your brand assets, you've got your plan. But a lot of times when people ask us all the time is like, do I always have to do everything the same? And so I think this is an important thing to say. Like, this still looks like it's part of the brand, but we didn't use the nature imagery here. We went with circles, we went with a little bit of a different graphic style, but this is a special one-off piece. So when you're thinking about, well, where do I need to kind of be consistent? Website, brochures, things that are going to be seen in context with each other. It's important to stick with it. But like an event or an annual report, something that's going to be done once and like that's the look for the year. Sometimes there's a benefit to making it seem a little bit different, a little distinctive.
And we created this many years into working with them. And so, like, we had really leaned in heavy to the green and the blue. And so, this piece being all green and blue, their people were used to seeing that color
Hmm.
combination. That to them meant Delaware Hospice. And so, we really wanted to lean into that color palette. Whereas a few years before that, some of the impact report, we needed to use more of that nature photography. We needed to use more. So things can evolve as people get comfortable with the brand style that you've created. And then finally, so I showed you what the website looked like when we redesigned it when we first started working with them. Since that was several years ago. Since then, they've hired graphic designers in-house, and so we haven't been working with them as often. And they now have a new website that they just launched. But interestingly, they are still using that nature photography style that we set up in the very beginning. And they're also still using leaning into those blues. They now are using gradients, but they're also using the green everywhere. So they're still using a lot of the things that we established. So it's interesting how a brand can carry on some styling ideas as it evolves and changes over time because trends change. But if you're establishing things that are sustainable, it's nice to carry things over for years to
Yeah.
come.
And I think that's really the important point. A lot of times people, you design a brand, and we always say it's going to evolve over time. Just because you need a refresh doesn't mean you've got to throw everything out and start over again. Sometimes you need to really start, like when we were hired, their stuff was really dated, really old. They needed to establish a look. But over time, you can have like rolling updates. You can take advantage of like a trend that's popular right now on something that you can refresh in a couple of years. So be careful of going with things that are too trendy on things that you don't have the budget to refresh too often. Um, and in other places like social, it's going to come in, it's going to come out. You can have a little bit of variety.
Yeah. So the next client that we're
There you
going to
go.
talk to you about is the Fair Labor Association, and they were an interesting case that Beth was kind of talking about it in the intro, where they came to us. They got a new logo designed. Then they realized, oh no, we have a new logo. What do we do next? They were in the process of getting their website rebuilt, and they realized they really didn't have any graphic style, any color palette beyond the logo, any fonts that they could use other than the logo fonts, which they were finding they didn't love when in practice, but they loved it in the logo. And so there were certain things that they started to discover after they got their new logo, and then they were like, oh no, now what? And so they ended up reaching out to us to help them create a graphic style and build out a look for their brand. And so this was the logo. And then what happened when they came to us was they had these three primary colors that were in the logo, and they liked using them, but they were finding that only having blues to work with was really, really limiting and kind of dull looking over time. And so they needed some additional colors to work with. And so we built out this secondary palette. And interestingly, we built out this secondary palette without that second color down, the gray color. And a couple months later, we ended up adding that in as we were building out some of their templates and graphics as we were building out their graphic style because we realized they just needed another neutral in there. And sometimes that happens once you start actually designing, you realize you need something more. And then some other things that we discovered when they started working in practice is that the logo font they did not love when it was typed out as body copy, even as headlines, they weren't loving it, but they did love it in the logo. And so they needed to find a font that would work for subheads and headlines, but they also wanted it to be a font that was free. So we had to like and could be pulled into Word documents and things like that. And so there was a lot of exploration that was done, and we landed on fonts that we could pull from that were Google fonts that were accessible to everyone on their team because they had team members all over the place, all over the world.
Right.
And so that was very
And
cool.
another thing you guys are going to see in a minute is this is very different. I mean, so Delaware Hospice had the problem that like they could use pictures, but like, oh, kind of depressing sometimes. This is a client that does not use photos really pretty much at all. So like, how do you create a graphic style when like you don't have the crutch of a photo and they have a ton of copy? So we
Mhm.
needed to give them a font that was narrow, like narrow enough that they could fit a lot of copy in, but not so narrow that when it was used in like if it was used in body, it would become unreadable. Really narrow fonts used at like 12 point, 11 point, completely unreadable. It's really hard. So we had to make decisions about how do we use space, how do we conserve space, and balance readability.
Yeah. And that's why we picked a very narrow font for their headlines and for actually for their subheads and for their highlight text.
Okay.
Um, And we picked a more narrow body copy font, but it was still wide enough that it's readable. Okay, so this is where Beth was talking about how we're going to show you some of our 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 work
Concepts.
before it was,
Yeah,
yeah,
the
our
work,
concepts,
the
yeah, our
hidden
work
work.
before it was chosen. So these are some concepts. We were taking the very first piece we designed. We're like, okay, so we have this new color palette, we have these new fonts. Now what? Like, what kind of graphic elements do you guys want to work with? We were doing a lot of exploration of how much is too much, how little is too simple. And so kind of trying to toe that line and figure out what made sense for their work, but also they have, as you can see, so many words, which I know many of you probably have to deal with that all the time. Um, and so finding a way to make all of those words look nice while still working with this new brand was something that we had to figure out. And so we ended up taking a little bit from a lot of different designs here. So these first two that are on the far left were way too busy. They were like,
And
that is,
sometimes you don't know that until you've seen it. Like sometimes we don't
uh-huh.
know it, and sometimes the client, like you guys as clients, you don't always know what's too much. Like like designers like to design, we like to put things on, but just like decorating is not the same thing as design. And so it's an interesting thing. Like we always try and push people to see like how much more is too much more, because if you have a reaction and you're like, whoa, that's no, to us that's like that's always great, because you should have a reaction to like that's too much, and then you have clarity, which I always think is really interesting. So even though some things you look at and you're like, what were they thinking, we kind of do it on purpose so that we can all test ourselves to see like what will functionally work, but also what's going to make you say no, this isn't us.
Yeah. And so what they landed on was actually kind of this top center one is what
Hmm.
they landed on, but the colors weren't working for them. They wanted to tone down the colors. They still felt like the green was too much.
So you're like
Um,
the least amount of design possible is the design look that they went for.
yes, but that's what worked for them.
Hmm.
And it worked for this content, and they still are using this style for all of their work today. So it has held up and it's working long term for them. We also then had to develop they have, again, lots of words, an accreditation report. We had to think about, okay, so you have all of these words, you have all of this information that you're trying to convey. How do we pull all of this into your new color palette? How do we pull it all into a style that presents your information in a way that's not, even though it may seem completely overwhelming to the people reading it, this is a much more readable way to read it than it originally was presented. Um, and yeah, so we had to kind of figure out how we were going to work with the brand. So that's where we established this logo. We blew up the logo, turned it into a pattern kind of background transition slide look that we ended up using on their PowerPoint template, which I'm about to show you in a moment. So we kind of established some styles while we were working on this that we carried through here. So some things that were also established in that code of conduct. So this was from the accreditation report. We have that blown up version of the logo. Um, the curved beige box was something that was established in the code of conduct design. Um, these fonts are all fonts that we had figured out, and oh, and this table style we had developed in the code of conduct. So really, as you're developing, I guess one piece of advice I have is once you have a new style, think about a piece that maybe is challenging for your organization to create. So this code of conduct was always a sticking point for them because it has so many words, but they needed to make sure it looked nice. And so we started with that because that was going to be one of the more challenging pieces to design. Something like a PowerPoint template, you can make that look beautiful relatively easily. And so by starting with a more challenging piece to kind of work out some of those little nuanced tricks and figure out, okay, so how are we going to make this new brand style work? that's just something I recommend as you go into creating your own graphic style or working with a graphic designer to create your graphic style.
And what's I feel like was really helpful about this is the client came to us, and one of their key things that they said was, "We need a secondary palette. We don't have enough colors to work with." Megan just told you that. Now look at the designs that they ended up picking. As it turns out, they actually didn't really want to be that colorful. However, they still needed a variety of colors to use in specific places. Having colors to be able to put into a chart. On the bars, like all the like bar charts and things from the code, not the code of conduct, but the report. Like here,
Yeah.
we needed some bright colors to there because they actually wanted everything to be neutral around it, and they wanted that to pop. So having secondary colors in your style guide isn't always enough. Sometimes it's fine and you can play mix and match and do whatever. This is a client that really also needed to say, and here are the rules around what you can use those secondary colors for. Because they wanted this sort of clean, simple, neutral look is like 90% of the design, and the colors are like 10% in the design. And that's if all of a sudden you start putting different things in, it can be crazy. Now we actually were just looking online, and their most recent annual report is like green and yellow. But again, a one-off project, a special project, you can often flip around and use your secondary colors in a more dramatic way in something that you do once or once a year. But this keeps
Yeah.
their core brand consistent.
Just like how we did something a little bit more unique looking for the impact report that we did for Delaware Hospice. Impact reports are a good way to kind of push the brand and but again, Fair Labor was still working with that secondary palette. They were still using the green from the palette. They weren't expanding past the brand. They were just leaning into those colors a little bit more.
Hmm. Which can often make something look completely different. Like if something's yellow and green, primarily after being this, it's going to stand out.
Yes, which I think they wanted.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the final example that we're going to discuss was one that we talked about in the Style Guides class, and Megan Rosanova, the graphic designer who is now expanding this graphic style into her everyday, is on today. So I just wanted to say hi, Megan.
Hi,
Um,
Megan. Yeah.
and so the Montgomery County logo, when we again we talked about this one in depth in the last class. So if you want to see the full style guide, that is all in that class. This class we don't have the style guide in there because we wanted to talk about some very specific things about their style. So as we were working with the Montgomery County logo, we built out the logo and we realized that the colors were, we really loved these muted colors in the logo. We tried brightening them up when we were developing the logo and it looked terrible. And so we loved these muted colors. But as we went into developing some of their graphic templates, we realized these muted colors look so dull. And for the county marketing, we just really did not want things to be that dull. And so we started playing with the colors and brightening them up and pulling in different colors. And we
No, this is still
realized
this is still the first version.
this is still the first version, but I mean, the yellow's brighter, the colors are a little bit brighter. But what we realized is we really leaned into the green. So if you notice in the logo, you might not even notice it offhand, but the words Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and the all of the outlining is all a very dark green, which we loved in the logo. But then as it went into design, we realized that dark green made especially paired with the yellow, made everything feel very national parks. And so there were certain things that we just discovered as we were developing these. And I'm going to touch on a couple of things here, and then I'm going to push it over to Beth because she has a little bit more information about the development of these. So something else that you have to keep in mind when you are developing templates like this is how they're going to be used. And so a design like the third design, while it's really cool, it's very challenging to use when brought into Canva because shapes like that don't work great in Canva and they're not natively available in Canva. And so if you need those shapes to change color, you can't do that. And so there's certain things that you have to keep in mind when you are developing templates like this.
Yeah, and so I mean, we tried a whole bunch of different things. These aren't probably even the greenest, but every time we brought that dark green into the graphic design, it just like flattened it. It just like it was killing the design. When we were hired to do this project, Montgomery County had a very, very tiny team, and we were very lucky that as we began working on this project, they ended up hiring an in-house graphic designer, which really does change the opportunity for design. However, at a county level, they have a, I mean, even though it's a much bigger communications team than they used to be, it's still like all the design goes through Megan, and it's a lot of work. So she can't do everything, and so we had to think about the design from the perspective of what's the work that the communications department needs to do, and also what needs to get distributed. And that was a big thing. Like you can't have a core graphic style, and by graphic style, some of the things that we're talking about here is like, do we want, like we tried these things with angled shapes? Do we want swoopy shapes? Do we want really curvy shapes and circles? So this was sort of our first exploration to kind of put it all out there. And this helped us clarify, boy, this green isn't working. And I have to say, this is probably the first time we've done a project where the colors that we had to end up using in design weren't just like, here are all the colors in the logo, that's what we're going to use. And as you can see, the logo has a million colors. There's no way we were going to use all of those colors in kind of the pervasive graphic design, especially if you're giving it out to like the head of like Health and Human Services. Like, they're not a designer. You want to narrow it down and give them fewer choices, but we also want to give them tools and easy ways so that they can feel successful in doing things. And so when we shift the colors, it still needed to work with that logo. So it was really tricky. Like, you know, it was a lot of work really figuring out the color palette and figuring out what we were going to do. And this is also another interesting thing. It's easy to like do a logo design and think that you're done figuring, we I have to say, all of us thought we were done figuring out the color palette. Then we started going into this templating, which is why it's really valuable to include some of this exploration as part of a rebrand, if that's something that you're doing, because we didn't know that the colors that we created in the logo weren't going to be like awesome, because there's at least, I don't know, 10 colors in that logo. You should, in theory, you should have enough, but they weren't working. And so we got the opportunity to actually play with it and change and adjust to see what would work. And because we needed it to work, we needed them to be bright, we needed them to be able to do a variety of different things, but we also still needed it to look like a municipality. So Megan, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay, so Megan's probably gonna like start twitching if you remember this. So as I said, as you're exploring things, like that doesn't work to one extreme. So you start trying, I mean, as designers, we try lots of different things. And so I really tried like, okay, let's push it. Let's go crazy. So we tried all kinds. So we went simpler, we went more complicated. So actually I was working on the design on the left. And so my thinking was, okay, so the logo is a weird shape. It's not a circle, it's not an oval, and it's not a rounded rectangle. It's something in between, like on purpose. And so maybe there's something there. Maybe if we take that weird rounded circle and do some fun things with it, we can create something really cool. So I created the one on the left, and they thought I'd lost my mind. And but one of my other designers created this one in the middle, which was like a dashed line with some circles on it. So then I was like, okay, well, I don't know if that's really right. It feels a little generic. And so then I tried to put the oval onto a line to see if that would work. And if you look at the design number 3, what you're seeing in there is you're seeing an oval on top of a line, you're seeing a rounded corner box, and you're seeing a little bit of transparency. So then we kept going, dug in, we weren't there yet, it wasn't really working. So then we got to the next set.
Well, the next set is the final. So the next set
Yeah.
is what we landed on. Yes.
Yeah. So this is where we went. So this was that sort of the Megan and the team saying, we're a municipality. It can't be that busy. It needs to be simple. It needs to be clean. But you can see how we got to this. Sometimes you have to do crazy stuff to get you where you're going. So if you can see in the finals, we have one curve that's the same everywhere, very similar. It can be moved high, it can be moved low, it can be flipped. It can be transparent, it can be solid. So there's all of that, is that flexibility. It is a little more challenging to use something with transparency and to use something that's a curve in Canva. But we also needed things like Megan is there. She's a graphic designer. She knows what she's doing. She can work with more complicated shapes. And then we have the simpler shapes that are a little more available and have more flexibility for getting distributed to the group. You can see in the one in the center, there's a vertical rule, and sometimes we use that rule horizontally. We call it the link line because the little ovals are kind of like links on a chain, and we use it both as like a divider. We use it as like here we use it as bullet points, and they're strung together. What it does is it's just a little nod to something distinctive. That shape of the oval ties it to the shape of the logo without getting crazy. We have rules in our graphic style around what you can do it. Like you can't have a bazillion colors. Like the center of the oval can be white, it can be transparent, or it can be the color of the oval. But you can't have like a turquoise colored oval with an orange level center. Like we don't want it to start looking too crazy. But as you can see, just like Fair Labor, see those icons? There's an orange, there's the green coming in, there's that golden yellow, there's a lighter blue. So we have this secondary color palette, but we use it really judiciously. Now, Megan, as a designer, she has a more expansive version of the style guide. So the orange, Megan's gonna remember. I think it's the orange and a couple of other colors. I can't remember all. There's oh, that's right. It's an orange and then two different colors of green are colors that like only the staff, only the communication staff can use because we wanted to keep the people that weren't trained in design in a little bit of a tighter cattle chutes. But we see we've got the curved box. We ended up deciding that going vertical with typography was going to get complicated. It was going to get hard to deploy for other people. And so we kept simplifying and simplifying until we felt like we had the right balance of like enough uniqueness that it felt special and distinctive with enough space to put lots of words. Because again, in reality, it's not art school. There's not five beautiful bullets and then we're done. Real organizations have real copy that you have to deal with. So it's really, that's another thing that's important when you're testing out your templates to do some that replicate maybe a template that you did a year ago. If you had a flyer that you did over the last year, pull in that copy and use it with real content. It's really easy to design templates like the one on the right here, subhead 1, subhead 2, subhead 3, and then you like, okay, if it's in all caps, is it likely that it's going to go to 3 lines and start looking terrible? So you have to think about those different contexts. Templates are an amazing thing, but they're also complicated because in the wild, they don't always work the way that you would think. So, Megan, I think you also have
Yes.
Megan Rosanova's lovely social feed up so that you can see, what Megan's been doing with the templates since we turned it over to them.
Yes. So this was just a way to
And
show
Megan,
how,
if you have any input on how it's going, please feel free to throw it in.
and this is just a way to show how they have been using these templates that we put together and deploying it in different ways. And I mean, Megan, as a graphic designer, has been messing with them and making some changes to the templates and playing with the design elements, but it all feels very branded. It all feels very much like those original templates. And I can scroll up a little bit just to show a few more things that they've done.
Awesome. So you guys have been shockingly quiet in here today. So what are your
There
thoughts?
is one question, Beth, just so
Mhm.
you know, in the
Oh, good.
Q&A. Yeah,
Oh,
but
in the Q&A, the one box I
while
didn't
we're
open today.
answering that question, if you have any questions, please hop into the chat or the Q&A and put those questions up.
Awesome. Okay, so the question's from Anne that says, this is,
Anna.
Anna, sorry, my eye's terrible. Wondering if there are some general points or pointers you have as far as how to establish a sustainable brand and design points that can carry into a brand refreshes in the future. That's a really great question and a really important point, Anna, is that like a lot of times what I'll tell people if they say, "Well, we hate our logo or we hate our design, but we're going to do a refresh in the future. What do I do now?" And so my advice is usually if you're planning on doing something significant in the future, go simple now. Don't do anything dramatic. Tweak a color,
Hmm.
try a font, maybe try some more tints of colors and things. it's not the time to start adding a link line or a curved box or anything that's too noticeable or that's really going to make your stuff look significantly different. Um, but I would basically try and explore adding colors, taking a colors away, maybe even taking some of your subordinate colors, seeing how they work if they're more prominent. But you may hate all of your subordinate colors and want to get rid of them. We actually are working with another organization that is going from a very bright, like vibrant color palette, and they're in the middle of a rebrand. And so last year when we did their annual report, this is actually a perfect equation for that. Perfect with example. That's the word I'm looking for. Example of that. So they had this very bright, like hot pink, bright purple, teal, turquoise, super bright. They don't know where they're going. So one of their colors, they are a
Horticulture
horticultural
Society.
organization. And so what we did last year for their annual report is we leaned into their dark green, their light green, and I think we had a tan or a
Like a
beige,
neutral beige
like a
color, yeah.
neutral beige color. So, and Megan, was the neutral beige part of their palette already, or did we add that?
It's part of their website palette. And
Ah,
so it's not part of their typical marketing palette, but they wanted to pull that in from their website because they felt like that was a good neutral to pull in because their marketing palette actually did not have a neutral in it.
right.
And so that was
And you
their
could
way of,
tell everything in their marketing was like on 11. It was like every color is the same hue, the same vibrance. And no wonder the rebranding. It's beautiful, but it's tough to work with when
Mhm.
everything is shouting, everything is the same. I always say that like the wooden building in Vegas would be the one that would get noticed because everything's neon, right? So different is helpful, and having a neutral in any color palette is really important. Having a pop in any color palette is important. Having a dark is important. And so as they're going through this transition, they don't know where they're going to land. Instead of going, okay, well, we're going to totally change the colors, we basically just tightened up and worked with, we used their green because they're horticulture, so green is always going to be fine, even if they end up changing their green. And then like the neutral gave us ways to make some boxes. It was an annual report we were working on. Some boxes, some like shaded areas without really feeling like we were introducing anything new. Another time we were doing a giving day for a client, and their colors were like a bright red and white and black. Like that was it. And we're like, oh geez, this is really hard. And we talk about this sometimes. And so where we weren't really allowed to create another color, what we did was we ended up adding some black to the red to make it more of like a dark red. And so we could then layer the bright red on top of the dark red, and we could use the dark red in copy, like in a headline, in a way that the red was just screaming at you. And it didn't read to the client like, oh, they've added to our color palette. We basically created a shade or a tone of their red color to give us a little more options while they were figuring out their what's next. And I think they're still colors. That's still their brand.
Yeah, and I mean that's actually a very good point. Specifically with them, we added a tone or a shade because with red, when you lighten it, a lot of the time what we do is we'll create tints, which are a lightened, like adding white to the color to lighten it up, to expand the palette a little bit without changing a palette, like when you're in a situation like Beth's been talking about. But with red, it's very difficult because it turns pink.
Hmm.
And so if you if you the problem with that is if you're changing from red to pink, that's a change. Whereas going from a darker green to a slightly lighter version of that green, it doesn't feel as dramatic. And so creating a tone of that red was a good compromise for them because we needed to create something that would work in that way.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that speaks a little bit to like, so when it comes to sustainable, like let's make sure we address the sustainable part of Anna's
Yeah.
question. So having a palette that you've got a dark enough color for copy, a bright enough color for like social and to create pops. It's sort of like decorating a room. Like what color you may put a medium color on the walls, a neutral color on the walls. You might have like a dark color for your couch, and then you're gonna have like a bright yellow pillow. Like think of it like that. What's your pop? What's your anchor? And what's your sort of like surrounding framework of things? So that's for fonts, and then getting even beyond that, even having simple things like making some decisions around like what weight are our rules. Like even in this annual report that I was just talking about, I had to go through the whole thing, and we picked a 1 point rule. So that I just made sure that all of our rules are consistent. And how are we doing them? Are they like even a little thing like a rule? Is it close to the copy? Is it farther away from the copy? Is it a white rule? Does it have any ends on it? Things like that. And that actually rolls into John's question. So, John, first of all, hi, how are you? It's so good to see you. We haven't talked to you in a while. So, John's asking to suggest ways to coordinate font selections across print and web. Not all print fonts work well on the web for copy and headlines. That is so true. And also, we're starting to see in our work that accessibility is becoming huge, huge, huge. And every client that we've worked with for the last, I don't know, 3 years, we've had to go through an accessibility review. It was really big in what we just did with Montgomery County. We talked about that in last month's webinar. But Megan, you're the one that usually picks fonts and has to make that work. What would you say?
So my recommendation is actually, if it's possible, trying to pick your fonts for the web before you pick what's going to work on in print. Because for the most part, if it works on web, it's going to work on print. You can also make some decisions, like if you, for some reason, want to use like a fun scripty font for your print pieces, but you're realizing it's really just not working on web, you can create a brand standard just in your brand guidelines. It says like this font is to only be used in print pieces. But I always recommend, especially when trying to establish a body copy font, if you want to find something that's going to work both on the web and if you want the same font for all of your body copy, I recommend figuring out what works on web and then making that work in print. You can make some suggestions if needed, but I highly, highly recommend choosing for web first. Another thing that you might want to think about, and that I just highly recommend in general, is that as you're thinking about your font choices, that you're thinking about who needs to use these fonts. Do you have a graphic design team that's going to be creating all of the materials? Or do you have people in departments all over, say for Montgomery County, we had to establish a font that would work in Microsoft tools that's a native in them, that they could just tell the team, tell everyone that they could use. I believe it was Aptos that we decided on. That's native in all of the Microsoft programs. So as you're thinking about font choices, that's just another thing to think about is it just the graphic design department using that font, or is everyone going to have to be using the font? And if that's the case, like in the case of Fair Labor, we picked a font that's not necessarily native in Microsoft fonts, but we picked, because they didn't need that, they did have a marketing team, we picked a font that was a Google font that they could pull in. And so that's just things I always like to recommend considering when you're picking brand fonts.
Okay, we have one more question, and I think it's from, and if I mangle your name, I do apologize, Needy. How do you handle conversations with clients if their chosen color combination and our font are hard to read, IA not WCAG or AAA compatible? So, right, so number one, Megan and I are actually going to be doing a whole session on branding and accessibility in our brand conference that's coming up in September. So, and it's free this year, guys. Sign up if you haven't signed up. So we're gonna really talk about it because accessibility is often talked about purely from the perspective of web, and what we're starting to see in our work is exactly what you're saying. If the colors that you have to build your website with aren't going to work, then like I can't really, you're stuck. You get really stuck. And so it's funny, we're finished the research on a rebrand right now, moving into a discussion on do we need to change the logo or not. And it's for an association of disability organizations, and their colors are pale yellow and like a medium blue. And none of the people in the research said that they had any problem with the logo, but they're in a specific situation where having inaccessible colors is not in alignment with them demonstrating and living their mission. So one way that I'm starting to talk about it with people is exactly that. How is having these colors and having colors that are not accessible, is that letting you move closer and be more alignment? Your brand shows up in how people experience it. And and not everybody is in that space, but I'm telling you, every college that we've worked with for the last couple of years has like a full-time professional that's accessibility. It's coming, guys. We have to deal with this. But I can also say that in general, General industry standard is trying to hit to love to AA. Like so triple A is like the highest standards of WCAG, which is like the website accessibility. In general practice, it's it's great if you can hit it, but one step down in double A is kind of considered the design average, the design norm. If you can hit that, you're doing okay. If if the colors that they have, if the color combinations, and that's another point that Nidhi's making, is that a color in and of itself is not inaccessible, a color combinations are. But there's always a combination because white, which may be your background, is still a color, even though you didn't create it. So if you have a pale yellow on white, you've got an accessibility problem, right? And so some of what you can do is go into an accessibility checker like WebAIM and put the combinations together and show people this isn't passing standards. That only is going to make a difference if it matters to them that it passes standards, right? The other thing that you can do to kind of work around some of that is you can use more black for copy. Like, so don't do cute designer things like make your copy gray. We were really, oh, designers, we were so into gray type for the longest time. Doesn't fly with accessibility. So stick with black type. Try and resist the urge or letting people do reverse type, like white type on like a dark background, or even like yellow, like we do this in print, yellow type on a blue background. Even in print, these things are hard for people to read. So just if you're in control of the design, just making better accessible choices, using your colors in ways like, so say you have a color palette that's not accessible, you can use that for like a rule. You can use it for non-directive, what's the word I'm looking for? Non-informational things. So push your colors that are inaccessible, or your combinations that are inaccessible, into less critical things that aren't actually delivering information, and focus on making the information delivery accessible. That's kind of like middle ground that you can probably work in without causing a kerfuffle about not using the brand. Does that, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and I highly, highly recommend using that WebAIM contrast checker, but also something when it comes to handling conversations with clients. I think it's important to think about who their audience is, because most likely, in this day and age, most likely their audience is going to care. In some cases, they may not, but if they work with seniors, if they work with people with behavioral health issues, if they're a school, if they're a hospital, if they're some kind of healthcare center, if they are, there's so many different organizations that actually are going to have to care about this, that for the most part, talking to them really carefully about who their audience is and the importance of accessibility for that audience, so that they're not going to have to go back. And the other thing I like to remind them is, okay, so you want to make these choices now so that in 2 years, when it becomes an even bigger deal, that you're not going, oh no, we just made these decisions. But you also don't have to sacrifice design. We have one client that works primarily with seniors, but they still want their work to be beautiful. And we have a color palette that's sometimes a little bit tricky to work with. And so in that case, like they love knocked out type. And so we put like big pull quotes and things like that, or big headlines over knocked out over a dark background, because that is still accessible as long as it's a certain size. And so like kind of working in that way is also another way to kind of get around it and still feel like you're allowing yourself to be designers, because people like to be designers and have designery looking things, and it and accessibility does kind of suck the life out of that a little sometimes.
Awesome. Okay, so three things. One, we're going to talk a lot more about this on conference, and we actually are going to have one more session. We're actually going to be bringing in somebody to talk specifically about accessibility in social. As I think that's going to be
August.
our
Yeah.
August community webinar. Next month, we're actually going to be talking about publications and moving, actually, a university's alumni publication from print publication into digital, which was, I mean, the amount of accessibility work we've done in that to make it work. We've learned all kinds of stuff just from that project. So that's going to be really interesting about how do you take like your content that used to be print that's going up online and making it accessible. So that's two things. Sign up for the conference. It's free, so it's going to be great. The other thing that we're going to be talking about at conference, which I'm super excited about, the last couple of times we've told you, we've shared some of the work that we've done for this Montgomery County project. Megan Alt, who is the communications director at Montgomery County, is going to come on to the conference and talk about from her perspective. Now that she's been handed the brand, how are they moving it through? How are they actually moving it into transition? Because it's great when you have somebody like us that comes in and puts it all together and says, ta-da, this is what your template should look like. But she's got to get it out so that different people at the county are using it and being consistent. So it's training and tools and resources. So she's going to talk about what it's actually like to go through that brand transition. And then we have a question for you today. So this has been great, and we hope you guys are appreciating this and liking these things that we're doing. But we're always curious about like where you are, why are you coming, what do you need? We've been thinking a lot about how we can help you. For many of you may know that are here, for over a decade we ran a program called Nonprofit Toolkit, and it was 90-minute long webinars where we really helped try and teach all kinds of great graphic design and marketing skill sets. And it was amazing. I truly believe that we helped thousands of you learn more skills. If any of you were here for any of those, say hi. I hope it was helpful. But then the pandemic came and everybody's doing this stuff all the time. And obviously you guys have just been here for an hour. People still pay attention to some of that. But what we're starting to see is that the questions that we're answering here are questions that are burning questions that you have all the time. So we're just curious, like, what do you need right now? We stopped Nonprofit Toolkit because it just became like people just didn't want to be, they weren't in that headspace to be in long classes anymore. So I'm going to just launch a little poll here. It's got two questions in it because we're starting to think about this. Like, okay, Nonprofit Toolkit ran its course, classes were great, but like, what's going on with you now? How are you getting your questions answered? What are you looking for? I don't know what we're going to do. We don't know what we're going to plan, but if you could just take a minute and just answer it's just two questions right here in our poll. And then we have another bigger favor to ask of you. So we really, really want to learn. Like, we don't want to go and build another thing and say, hey, we built something for you and expect you to like it. We want to know what's going on, what's hard, what's challenging, what's awesome. Where do you need whatever you need in your lives? Like, yes, we can't give you an extra staff person, which I'm sure is what you all really need. But I want to talk about this kind of stuff. Where do you go to get your questions answered? What would be helpful? What would be valuable for you? And so we're actually going to do a focus group next week on Wednesday afternoon. And so any of you that would be willing to come and do this, we would be so thrilled. You guys, especially those of you that have been on these two sessions with us, really kind of know how we like to talk about things. So if you'd be open to joining us for a focus group, put yes in the chat right now. We would really, really appreciate that. And then anybody that comes to that focus group and stays for an hour, just gives us an hour of your time, we're going to put your name into a hat. And then one of you is going to win an hour-long graphic review with me and Megan, or one of us. One of us is going to come in and take a look at your stuff and just give you that hour of like one-on-one support to answer your design questions, learn a little bit more about what you need, see where we can help you, find out what you're struggling with, and kind of be the art director that you probably don't have access to. So we're so grateful for all of you that said yes. Thank you so much. If anybody upon further consideration changes your mind and says that you would love it, that would be great. I'm going to end our little poll now. Thank you all, everybody that shared that with us. And we'll be back next month for publications, and then the month after that for accessibility, and then it's conference in September, so we're super excited. Thank you all for joining us again, and feel free to give us a shout anytime if you need anything. Take care. Have a wonderful day.